Our last reader tonight, I'm really excited to introduce because before I came to Pitt, I wrote part of my undergraduate literature thesis on her work. So if you haven't guessed, it's going to be Lynn Emanuel. So Library Journal just named Lynn's new and selected poems, called The Nerve of It, one of this fall's best books of poetry from an independent press. Between September and April, she will have given 17 readings, including in Los Angeles, Lincoln, Nebraska, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, 4 times in New York City, everywhere from NYU to the KGB bar, Ohio, North Carolina, and Miami, Florida. She is trying to hit every state in the Union. Lynn Emanuel.
Choices. Michael Jackson, that was the most conservative. What would happen if I use this? I mean, not what will happen, but how do I use this?
We just turn it on.
No. Just because I'm coughing, and I thought maybe it would be...
It should be on.
Okay. Yeah? Sounds like a rainstorm. Okay. Maybe it's just too much trouble.
Yeah.
No? Okay. As we're preparing this, I'm going to start talking because Sam was very strict with me about the timing of all this. He is very strict. So I can't remember whether it was Jung or Freud, and if you do know this, tell me after the reading. But one of them said, in order to do my work, I need one good friend and one good enemy. And if Jung said it, the good enemy was Freud, and if Freud said it, the good enemy was Jung. So tonight I am reading from my one good enemy, which is prose. And I have to say, is this just distracting? Yeah. Okay. Let me just turn this off. Yeah. Let's just turn it off. Yeah. I'll be okay. I had a cough drop. So a friend of mine proposed a panel for AWP, since AWP is going to be in Los Angeles, on noir poetics, and it was an interesting group of people, pretty unexpected actually. But when I got the proposal, which was badly written and therefore not accepted, I was so dismayed by the description of what noir might be that I immediately started writing a rebuttal. And this is my rebuttal, part of it. It's vignettes, and the placeholder title right now is just called My Noir. And the first sentence is a kind of title in all these pieces. I was writing about my childhood, which happened in black and white, and was oniric, strange, erotic, ambivalent, and cruel. My early poems allude to noir for the same reason my students' poems allude to films of their childhood's lived experience. The feelings, events, even the look of noir were not only a style, they were actual, they were documentary, archival. On the screen, you got to behold everything that you had beheld. 1961. In preface to a 20-volume suicide note, Leroy Jones asks wearily, when is the end of the Second World War? On the timeline of my life, the Second World War ended only when the Vietnam War began. All of our early lives seethed with the Korean War, the Cold War, which clung to World War II like remora to sharks. At school, I was obliged to participate in duck and cover drills, but also wore military dog tags, which bore, among other things, my name and my religion, J/C, Jewish/Christian, and I wore them for the same reason soldiers do, to identify the body. My mother said, if anything happens, these would let people know my name and how to reunite me with my parents. The war ended in 1945. I was born in 1949. and lived on Cook Street in Denver, Colorado, 2 blocks up and to the right of the Bluebird Theater, where I went to the movies. Across the street were 5 houses of German immigrants who worked in the slaughterhouses. They lived, as we did, in stolid blue-collar homes with dark, cold cement porches and a patch of scabby red limestone sidewalk in front. Some of the men spoke English, and my father, who was Jewish, was a perpetual cloud of bad mood. I became friends with one of their daughters, went to Lutheran church with her and her family, and learned to polka and speak some German. Maria's house was steeped in blonde shadows. The old-fashioned roller blinds were smugly drawn in every room to protect her mother's wax flowers from the sun. At church, I was beguiled by the ceiling's immaculate skies, in which floated creamy clouds and succulent cherubs. My mother's parents owned a hotel on US Route 50 in Nevada. Most of the guests were truckers or civilians on their way to California, transients lost in the middle of nowhere. Some were miners who worked at the Kennecott. Along with the Great Wall of China, the Kennecott mine is one of only 2 man-made objects visible from space, the largest human excavation on Earth, and they're still digging to the rough tune of 100 feet deeper each year. The lobbies and hallways of the Collins Hotel were tiled with black and white linoleum and lit with dim sconces. The rooms contained an iron bedstead, a deal dresser, and a sink. The windows were decked out with the same jaundiced blinds that hung in Maria's windows, and I saw this very room time and again at the movies. The camera seemed to be waiting for me in that empty room. At the diner, breakfasting with my grandfather, egg and steak, blood and yolk on my plate, I am jamming nickels into a slot. Aside from my grandmother, my mother, and the maid, I saw no women at the hotel except for one. I breached her room when the maid cleaned it. I would follow the maid on her rounds, trailing from room to room, a small and avid voyeur with a shaky handheld camera of my attentiveness. Over the end of the unmade bed's iron bedstead hung a battered pair of white underpants, at the core of which was a deep red stain. In my mind, the image is biblical, a shroud with a bloody mark. The smell in the room was powerful. The maid flinched and opened a window, swabbed out the sink, and left. Days later, I saw the woman who lived in that room, wearing men's khaki pants and a flannel shirt, standing in the lobby with my grandfather, who was dropping quarters into her outstretched hand. After that, the window closes forever. Hotels. Before he moved to Denver from the loft on West 10th, my mother and I lived in a tiny duplex on Ivy Street, and before that in 2 rooms in a residential hotel. A window was faced by other windows, identical and inhabited. I still love the feel of entrapment. My mother was a single working mother in the 1950s. World War II had barely ended. There was no child care for families like ours. There were no families like ours. When my mother traveled, I was left with friends, acquaintances, the ill-tempered and resentful family of a cleaning woman, where I slept in a canvas World War II cot used to transport wounded soldiers. Bohemia. But first we'll drive the stations of downtown, pool hall, flop house, jazz joint, jail, whorehouse down Folsom, and the darkest alleys of Larimer, paying respects to Denver's father, lost on the railroad tracks, Allen Ginsberg. Larimer Square, Tokay and bags with twisted necks, and the Platte River, flexuous corridor for my travels, wrote Neil Cassidy. On the basement walls of the Cook Street house, he painted a wilderness of vines and blossoms, despite the smell and the dark, weak spot on the cement floor from a pipe's abiding drift. A young woman in slacks with hot red hair rented it, her breasts sharpened to points by her brassiere. Although windowless, there was a bed down there and some sort of bath. And there were life drawing classes, a nude women in front of rows of men and women, erect before gleaming slabs of white paper set on easels, gripping sticks of dirty charcoal. Several times, Rothko came through Denver on his way to Boulder, and I was spiteful to his daughter in the sandbox, the one where cats left redolent turds breaded with sand. My early poems were often entitled Photograph, but in fact, they were always more filmic than photographic. Not a genre, but a style is the way film historian Thomas Schatz identifies noirs, influenced by cinematic newsreels, which I also saw at the Bluebird, curtains of bombs on London, curtains of bombs on Berlin, and on-location photography. Noirs were typically B movies with low budgets, no professional extras, and were free from big picture constraints. Noirs could get away with more. They could be risque. B films, noirs, empowered me to write B poetry, with characters, situations, and events not possible, I thought, in more classical, decorous, and formal A poetry. When I look back at my early poems, for instance, I think of the figure of my father as a kind of unpaid extra drafted into the work of these poems. In one, he has to stand beside the high art, abstract, expressionless canvases of Arshil Gorky. I'm almost done.
You're fine. You are totally fine.
At the movies, I identify with the coroner. I enter the body, because everyone and everything we see is a self-portrait. I'm a dead man when I look at a dead man. At the movies, every image is a mirror, every soundtrack is a gun. This is a movie about a man tricked out in muscles, so in the dark theater, I don the breastplate of a hairy chest. There is a mustache, so I duck under the low lintel of the lip, taste ice cubes percussive in a glass of gin. Restless barges swarm the river of my drunkenness. Of all the lives in all the countries of the world, I walk into this one. A phone rings as it is rigged to ring. The snow, like a sentence in a book, struggling through the dark from left to right, looks like it is trying to escape. And we have pockets stuffed with a dirty bolus of $5 bills and a dog in a yard embossing the black mud with the imprints of her frantic leaping, mechanical, dutiful, uninspired, like a steady job. As a man, I hold my tongue, even though my tongue is wet and mobile as a fish in an aquarium. I stand in the dark. I wait for the inspired freight of my future to arrive, or at least in the dark of the Bluebird Theater. That is the way it looked to me. The present, hotel, near the airport. Now, of course, the appalling now, so clearly here. Jared's jeweler, Amy's spa and nails, Yafei Chinese cuisine. The colors are neurotic, the architecture from Day of the Locusts. I dream of public, private spaces of my childhood, unmythologized and unrepresented except in noir. Deeply empty rooms wreathed in extremities. I am here, weary and situated, days spent editing on the nuclear edge. Elaborate new thoughts, arguable notions. So, dear night's indigenous citizens, no nostalgia, only some scraps of writing in a woman's hand, breaking into excessively loving detail. And the dark, sudden as snow, a cat's hiss. Beyond the window, unroomed night downpouring. I have become just another address to visit. A large white square van parked crookedly at the motel door, the cab light on, and a man in a cap urgently writing something on a piece of paper, a refrigeration unit purring in the back. And also, Je me souviens, says the French on the license plates of Quebec. It is 3 a.m. I am one more terrible metaphor. A woman in a dress and heels treads the moody, unlit parking lot, dragging a pink suitcase. Here, at the corner of evening, noises, infants, televisions. And my father died in exile. At that time, I was checking my poems for quality control in Amsterdam. That angry, erotic, nervy girl, red lips, severe skirts, abundant, gay, enormous nonconformity. World, I dispute you, was my motto. Citizen of the temporary, the moving and always moving. I get out of bed, a sweep of light across my ceiling. I've dreamt delicate European sentences, elusive and emptied rooms, echoing stanzas that accommodate their author's undistinguished characters. Among my books, I find this sentence: literature, death without peace. Dear emergency readers, really, I am too much of a Jew to do this work. Thank you.